Well, now it's the end of the second day already. It's too late for you to go home and ask for your money back. So I have a confession to make. You were all brought here under false pretenses. At least we're honest enough to admit it, right? There's no such thing as ego death. How could there be? The ego itself is an illusion. I mean, we did tell you that, right? So how can an illusion die? It wasn't alive in the first place. And if there's no ego death, there's no divine rebirth either. And if the ego is an illusion, then what was all that stuff Radha was just talking about? You know, you can just let it all go. Burn your notebook. Disregard it. Sorry, Radha, we have to come clean here. You know, we make things difficult for you, so you think, oh, this is serious stuff. You got to learn all this. But let's face it. If the ego doesn't exist, why do you need to know about this soy burger, right? So I guess we can all pack up now. I mean, there's no... And you know, it's very interesting because all religions tend to do this. You know, they make a mythology up because they'd be out of business if they didn't. You know, they know that. So at least we admit it's a mythology. And people need it because probably you wouldn't have come here if you didn't think, oh, I'm going to get something out of this, ego death, I'm going to, you know, divine rebirth. I'm gonna get some bliss, right? This is worth my whatever you paid. Maybe you didn't pay anything. It's still worth. The food is good, right? It's a beautiful place to be. Who cares? You know, you got to say something. But religions really are just myths, and this one's no different. There's an interesting passage in one of the books by Ramana Maharshi, where he comes clean too. It's very interesting. It's in the I mean, we're following in his footsteps, so don't blame me, you know. I warned you, he was our guru. All right, he wrote this book. Well, he didn't really even write the book. Let's get really honest about it. You know, somebody else wrote it. They asked him some questions, and they wrote it. He said, is this okay? Yeah, okay, it's all right. Yeah. So he didn't really put pen to paper. Apparently he did put his finger in the sand to answer a couple of things, but who knows what was actually written in the sand. It couldn't have been very much, you know. But anyway, around verse, you know, how extensive a discourse can you give with your finger in the sand? Around verse 39 of the 40 verses on reality that is attributed to Ramana Maharshi. He says, despite all the foregoing, don't you dare try to put any of this information into effect, you know, in your actual daily life. He said, you're not even allowed to act as if you know any of this stuff. Now, okay, granted it was a pragmatic protection. Because if you really act in the world knowing that it's an illusion and that it's all a non-dual unity, you're going to get in a lot of trouble, all right? You don't really want to get crucified. You don't really want to get burned at the stake. Right? You don't want to have what happened to Jesus happen to you. So it's better, therefore, to follow some mythology and to believe that, you know, I haven't gotten it yet, and therefore I'm just still on the path, but I'm not somebody who is a threat to the system or anything like that. And Ramana said, especially, you know, don't act with your guru as if you two are on an equal level. I mean, come on, let's get real here. If it's non-duality, who's the guru, right? Why is there a difference between a guru and a disciple? That's insane, right? We're all one. Who's the guru? Now, okay, Ramana was very honest, and he said, this guy here that you're looking at isn't the guru. The guru is invisible presence, right? But, it was always bowing to Ramana. Okay. So, we're not going to go through any of that, because we're admitting the reality. It is that you are the gurus here, okay? There is no individual guru, because that would be an ego if there was, and there's no ego. But then your ego can't be the guru either, because your ego is just as much of an illusion as anyone else's. So there can't be ego death if there's no ego in the first place. And the really sad news is, therefore, the bottom line, you do not exist. Sorry. Despite all the plans you've made, and all the nice clothes you bought and all of that, you don't exist. It was all for nothing. You're an empty suit, right? Just like all the rest of them. And this is so difficult to take in because it means giving up the romantic ideal that you're going to achieve something, right? Like the hero's journey of Joseph Campbell, who was obviously taken in by it. I think he was sincere. There's no hero's journey because there's no hero. And there's nowhere to journey to, because not only is the ego an illusion, but all of this is an illusion. It's all created by the mind. It's a hallucination. And because of that, there's no journey to anywhere, except perhaps to the realization of that fact, that there's no one on a journey. That's the real goal of the pilgrimage, is to realize there was never any pilgrimage at all. That all you were ever doing was going around your own mind. Just like they walk around the Kaaba stone, in Mecca 7 times. You walk around your own mind, around your 7 chakras of your mind, until you reach the beginning. And so coming to terms with the fact that there is no entity, there is no one home, there is only absence, as Jose Maria said, el vacío. It's true, there is el vacío. But what is the vacío? It's not even a lack of being, because even that would be something. It's not even that. It's not even a non-being. It's not anything that can be described, and there's no one to describe it. So in that sense, it's perfect freedom. But it's a freedom that cannot be used by anyone for any purpose. And the kicker in all of this, and the reason why it's so important, is that we spend so much of our time trying to figure out what we're going to do next in our lives, right? And there is nobody doing anything. And all of that is an illusion, because you don't decide anything. It's decided for you. What all the mind does is rationalize something that has happened. But it's paralyzed in terms of making a decision. Should I? She loves me not, right? All of that. Something happens, and then, okay, I did that because, when you make up some discourse about why you did it. But that's not why it happened. Why whatever happens in this hallucination happens is completely unknowable. And that's why, Ramana told his mother, when he wouldn't go back home with her, that, hey, the ordainer decides. I don't decide this. And he was being truthful there. It's not that he was deciding not to go. He wasn't deciding anything because he was already realized that he didn't exist. So if the decision were to be made to go home, it would have been made. We really don't decide anything, and we don't do anything. And so if we would stop believing that we have to make all of these important decisions that will determine our destiny and all of that, I mean, we'd save 90% of our energy, which goes into worrying about all these things. So there's no one who exists who makes any decisions, who does anything, who achieves anything, who ultimately kills their ego. All of that is a myth. It's probably a real downer for you all. But let's explore then what's underneath that myth. If that is all untrue, what is the real? What is the consciousness that is apparently watching this movie, but isn't really watching the movie because there's no one there? It's an emptiness, it's a nothingness. So there's no one watching the movie, right? We've established that. Because if there were someone watching the movie, that one would be an object. It would be an entity, a thing. And we've already established there can't be an entity or a thing. Because whatever is an object is being perceived by consciousness. And so consciousness inherently is non-objective and therefore non-existent. So the self cannot be an object, but nor can it be a subject. Because as soon as it is identified as a subject, it becomes a subjective object. Right? This is the problem. As soon as you have the I thought, you have created the illusion again. There is no I. The concept of I is the first mistake, and then everything else follows upon that. So there is no I. So therefore, what is watching the movie is the movie itself. This is a self-enjoying video game. A self-licking ice cream cone. But the self cannot be an individual observer. So even this idea of being the witness is still within the mythology. Because there is no one witnessing. The witness is the entire hologram itself. Not some individual part of it. Because it's not made up of individual parts or entities. It's one whole. Therefore, consciousness is not localizable, whether in any particular organism or point in space or time. And that's why it's possible to have spontaneous memories of past lives or future lives, or being out of body, or being in someone else's body, or someone else possessing your body, or any of that. Why? Because it's only an illusion. It's only a mental construct that can float around in that illusion, because that's all the illusion is anyway, is made up of these constructs. But the constructs have no reality, they have no life, except to the extent that they are believed in. And this is why there can be ghosts, okay? Even though you don't exist, if you believe you exist, then that energy of belief gives life even to a subtle form after the physical body has died. And if the belief is strong enough, then that illusion of a person can haunt its home, its friends, its spouse, its whoever it wants to. Or if it gave its heart in a transplant to someone, it can follow into the body of that person who now has its heart in their body. But what is it that is doing that is only an illusion, a consciousness bonded to the illusion of a construct of a me. And so you can have all of these extraordinary phenomena happening, and yet none of them are real. And therefore there's nothing that you need to do about them. And so shamans can easily heal these things by recognizing that it's illusion, and with a stronger laser beam of mental energy cut through that belief in the person who is being disturbed, let's say, by a ghost or a curse put on by some black magician or whatever. These things can happen, but they all happen within the video game. But they have nothing to do with who you really are. Because you do not exist except as the entirety of the intelligence that makes up the phenomenal universe itself. Now, if you use that information to hollow out the ego mind and allow it to enable you to drop the game of belief that there is an ego that now has to wonder, how do I relate to my friends, and what should I do with my life, and all of that. All of that is ridiculous from that standpoint, right? But it'll happen. It will unfold. The video game will continue to play. But none of it really is of very much interest anymore once you get this. And you won't be obsessed with trying to figure out your life. You won't be obsessed with your body and trying to make it look as good as possible and stay young for as long as possible, and all of those things that people waste their existence on, instead of getting to the heart of the true ontological essence of what is. So you have to have the courage to wipe away all the mythologies and to stop believing in your own ego and stop trying to kill it off since it doesn't exist in the first place. There is nothing to do, and there is no one to do it. So once you get rid of that, life becomes very simple. And the mind becomes very silent. But there's a mourning period that goes with this realization. There's a grieving of the loss of the illusion, the grand illusion of the hero's journey, or of whatever mythological ideal that you bonded to in your life. And most people are unable to go through the mourning of the loss of all of the ego illusions. It's too hard to live without illusions. So people want mythologies. They want to believe in Christ crucified and risen, right? They spend the whole week, this week, getting drunk and pretending they're praying. But they need to be able to tell their children some mythology, so they can justify why they're spanking them for not being good and all of that. But the whole world depends on these mythologies, whether religious or secular. And yet if we don't have some beings who have awakened and have gone through the disillusionment of the loss of ego identity, then there's no way out of the suffering for all of those within the video game who, although they don't exist, they do suffer. And the good thing about non-existence is then there's no one to suffer either. There's no enjoyments, but there's no suffering. And so the bliss that we talk about is not a blissful achievement of an entity, of a being, but it's the complete absence of any suffering or stress. That's why I called it a deep peace. And imagine letting go of everything. It is a death. It is the real death. It's the death of worry. It's the death of stressing out over what's going to happen. And did I just make a mistake? Should I have told them all of this? Uh-oh. Oops. Right? All of those things. Well, I don't worry about it because there's no one to worry. It's too late. It happened. It wasn't my fault. The video game did it. I didn't do it. So you're free of all that worry, all that performance anxiety that is 90% of the anxiety that people feel. The other 10 is what other people are going to do to you, their performances. But these kinds of issues, when they are all released, they do create bliss. But there's no one experiencing that bliss. It's not an attribute of some being. It's simply the lack of a being to suffer. But there is no being to be in bliss. But bliss is the nature of all that is. But it's not something that is achieved by an individual through killing off an illusion of an ego. There is no individual. Although, if you analyze the etymology of the word individual, it means undividable. And in that sense, because you don't exist, you're not dividable. So it's correct, but it's not an undividable atom or entity of some kind. It's that you are nothing, so how can it be cut into pieces? So give yourself permission to grok the fact that you don't exist and therefore will never achieve anything in life. And will never achieve salvation because there's nobody to save. But that you're already beyond the need for salvation, since you are not. And even though, as I say, you can say that the phenomenal plane is the manifestation of that emptiness, but even the phenomenal plane is a hallucination. So it can't save you and say, okay, I exist as the world, since the world also is just an appearance with no essence, no substance. And it's a constant flux. There's nothing permanent in it. And eventually, the Big Bang will turn into a big crunch, and there'll be nothing left of the universe anyway. So it's only a temporary measure at best. And so, if we're going to be mature adults here, we have to accept the fact of the nothingness. And let go of all the mythologies that we have held on to, the discourse, the narratives about who we are and why we hate who we are and why we wish we had a different life with different friends and different qualities and more money and all of these things that fill the minds. Garbage in, garbage out, right? What would it be like? Do a thought experiment with me now. What would it be like to let go of all of those narratives? All of them. Once and for all. And to be the mind in absolute emptiness. With no desire, not even the highest desire of liberation. No fear. What can happen to you? You're already gone. Never were. And be absolutely free of any emotion, any thought. Not identify with any sensation, not desire to have any sensual pleasure. That's all the mirage. Not desire anything at all. Not fear anything. How would that feel? Close your eyes for a moment and just let yourself have that knowledge of being the emptiness, the authentic, real emptiness. And allow the emptiness to be absolutely empty of thought. This is not something to think about. There is no thinker. And make sure you let go of the fears of that illusion, illusory ego, the neuroses, the obsessions, the addictions, the anxieties, the superego attacks. Let go of all of that because it's all mythology that's just there to support the illusion that you exist. Drop it all. And see if it feels okay to realize in the long term, permanently, once and for all, that you don't exist. And not to forget this, not to go back into some mythology of existence. Would it be okay to live in this state? Or would it be unbearable? Is it liberation, or is it the worst loss conceivable? Or both? Can you? And here's the kicker. Since you don't exist, you can't even choose whether you're going to do it or not. There's no one there who can make that choice. Doesn't God have a great sense of humor? It's a crapshoot. But by enjoying that same sense of humor, that's the portal out of the delusion of egoic existence. If you can laugh at your own absurdity, the ridiculousness of believing in your own existence, and how important your existence is. Ha ha ha. How self-important the ego is, huh? If you can let go of that and laugh, then at least you exist as the laugh. Or do you? Does even that belong to an individual? Not even that. You don't control whether you're going to open your eyes again, but if they happen to open, that's okay. And if it so happens that a question wants to be asked coming out of your mouth, you'll raise your hand and it'll be asked. But don't create the illusion that you're asking a question. But if one spontaneously wants to emerge, that's okay. But give yourself permission to remain in the realization that you are being lived. You are not living. Your life is being lived. And you have no volitional control over how it's being lived. Who's living your life? But as long as there's an unconscious, the life is lived by the drives of that horrible soy burger you just had to learn about. But once that realization of its non-existence happens, then at least that is not living your life any longer. And then what will live your life is the completely unpredictable spontaneity of this non-existent, hyper-real emptiness. Jim.